Good morning, church family. Today is our last installment of the Ministering to the Mormons series with our Minister of Students, Reed Hernandez. This week we will cover the apologetical aspect of dealing with the Mormon faith. Let's hear what Reed has for us.
So this week we're going to wrap up our Ministering to the Mormons series. This is our third and final part with Reed Hernandez, our wonderful Minister of Students. He's done a great job breaking this down. We talked a lot about Joseph Smith, a lot about the Book of Mormon, a lot about the foundational stuff. But this week I wanted to focus on the apologetics, right? It's the Book of Mormon versus our Holy Scriptures. It is Joseph Smith versus the apostles and what Jesus are saying. It's what we say versus what the Mormons say. And last week, Reed, you hit a lot on this feeling the Mormons have where they sort of just, this feeling that they have, as long as you have that, you can believe what we're telling you, as long as you feel it in your heart. And the other part of it is that the Book of Mormon is one thing, but what we've seen is that they keep sort of changing as we go along, where there's different revelations. They keep getting revelations, and the rules have kind of changed. How did the Mormons combat the idea that they're getting these revelations, but how does their Bible not get corrupted over time as they continue to get these revelations over and over, and they keep moving the goalposts, it seems like? Isn't there a point where they're going to be this corrupt sort of scripture that they claim the New Testament and Old Testament of being at some point?
I think if you can't even keep yourself from making changes, after a couple dozen years, that's what happened in the Book of Mormon. And so I think if we're being fair, we have to ask, okay, well, if you think the Bible's been changed, let's look at some of the places that you might have questions about. So for example, the long ending of the Book of Mark, we just talked about that at church, right?
Yes.
Like Mark ends with the women being afraid. But throughout church history, scribes thought that wasn't an adequate ending, so they add the last 8 verses beyond that. Well, we know those last 8 verses were probably not original in Mark's gospel, right? So we can figure that out, and we know why those verses were added, and we can say we have confidence to believe this is not a part of the original. Well, we should apply that same scrutiny to the Book of Mormon and say, okay, for anything that doesn't add up between the 2013 version they give me on my doorstep, shouldn't we also be discerning of those changes too? I don't think any Mormon that comes to your door is purposefully being deceitful. I simply think they're being told what they've been told their entire lives, which is, well, the Book of Mormon is true, and the Mormon church is true, and the Bible's been corrupted, and we have the truth, and every other church, if they have the truth, they just have it in bits and pieces, right? And so any Mormon coming to your door is believing that, and I'm really not going to get mad at them for it, because I'm not going to get mad at them for believing what they've been brought up in. Yeah. I'm just saying we have to have the conversation now. Yeah. It's not just something as easy as, well, just read this book and pray about it. I don't think it's that easy. Mm-hmm. And I think that anybody that is going to use their brain is going to weigh that. And so this is where I think it becomes frustrating if you're ever talking to a Mormon, because the conversation is going to inevitably end probably in that place, which is just, well, you just need to pray about it more. Yeah. And if you don't pray about it and genuinely seek God, then you're never going to know that it's true, right? And that places the burden certainly on the person being proselytized. But imagine being a Mormon yourself and saying, well, I've been brought up in this, and my parents believe this, and I really don't have a strong feeling about this inside of me. And anytime I bring up a doubt or insecurity, I'm just told I need to pray about it more, right? Or I just need to work harder at being a good Mormon, Imagine if that's how we raised our kids. Imagine if that's how we discipled the kids in the kids ministry, to say, well, the way Jesus rose from the dead, just pray about it. And if you have a warm, fuzzy feeling, that's how you know Jesus rose from the dead, right? Well, that places a lot on the individual, and a lot that can be sort of faked or manipulated, right? Yeah. Like if we're just hanging this all on a feeling, feelings come and go. I mean, Jeremiah 17:9 says, our heart is deceitful, and we can't always trust it, right? And I'm being told, well, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether what I'm reading adds up or not. I just need to pray about it. Okay, well, where do you find that in the Bible? I mean,
I have not found that in the Bible myself.
When Jesus is talking to the Pharisees about correcting some of their beliefs and correcting their interpretations of the Old Testament, Jesus never says, well, you know that I'm right if you just pray about it, right? Yeah. What did Jesus say? Haven't you read? Jesus is always going back to the Old Testament and saying, you want to make sure you're getting your Bible and theology right? Go back to the prophets. Go back to the law, right? And so we should look at Jesus and say, Jesus never told anybody, well, just pray and you'll know that I'm the Son of God. No, Jesus was saying, read the Bible, listen to what I'm telling you, and watch what I'm about to do. And that's how we know that Jesus is who he says he is, right? So Mormonism sort of ends at this weird, almost like anticlimactic dead end where it's like, well, the way that you know we're right is if you just pray about it and rely on a feeling, you know? And to me, that's very unsatisfying. To anybody that's trying to love the Lord with their mind, that's unsatisfying. And so I don't know whether that's deflection. Do they just not want me to look into the Book of Mormon further? Because they have apologists. You can find answers online. You can Google a question and say, is the Book of Mormon historical? You can find articles that will back that up. But they do hang it all really on this, what they call burning in their bosom. It really is just this warm feeling. Again, I don't think it's wrong for any of us to have a positive inner feeling about our faith because we know that our faith should impact our thoughts. But if that's all that we have to rely upon, well, our feelings come and go, right? And so Mormonism kind of ends with this kind of shifting sands of, well, you can believe it once you have the feeling inside of you, right? And I think we as Christians would think about that differently.
So one of the other questions I have about the Book of Mormon is the polygamy topic, because I'm not getting the sense that it's in the Book of Mormon. It seems to come along later. And when you think about Mormonism, the average Joe is going to think the polygamy, the sister wives, the multiple wives thing, that kind of sticks to them. Where does that come from? Because it doesn't seem to be in the original sort of theology, right?
Absolutely. I'm just going to find the verse that talks about monogamy. There's a verse early on in the Book of Mormon that essentially says God created man and woman to be monogamous. And so in the Book of Mormon, you have a very strong monogamy put forward. And then you end up in D and C, I believe it's Doctrine and Covenants 132. That's the polygamy revelation, where essentially now polygamy is being revealed as okay and acceptable, and that polygamy can be practiced under certain circumstances. And so once again, you have this ever-evolving theology from Joseph Smith, and the polygamy thing really comes about mostly just because this is a human man, and he wants to do human things with women, right? If I could put it mildly. What you sort of have as this Mormon belief system continues is that Joseph Smith kind of rises to be this more and more like unchallengeable figure. And so he sort of starts drinking his own Kool-Aid, if I could put it that way. Like he's built this church. People are buying what he's selling. He's got 1,000 followers now between Ohio and Illinois. And he's making money and he's doing all right. And now, well, if I want to go and marry this woman, here's the revelation that God gave me that I can go marry this woman, right? And so by his death, it's estimated that Joseph Smith had anywhere between 27 to 49 wives.
Woo! That is a lot of anniversaries.
And so a lot of, obviously, that's not a very popular thing for Mormons to think about in their history.
So what is their reasoning and explanation behind that?
The way that they sort of try to explain it is to say, well, these were spiritual marriages and these were spiritual unions. Nothing ever was sexual. Well, that's what they claim. But if you go and read some of the diaries of these women that he was married to, it was sexual. At least with several of them, aside from his wife, Emma. And sadly, Emma was not aware that some of this was going on. So he was hiding this from her. And he was even a couple of times marrying women that were already married within the Mormon church. So these are wives of men that are in this church and wives of some of his friends that he is secretly having these ceremonies with and then presumably consummating the marriage with. And so by the end of his life, he's sort of just, he's past the point of no return here. He's got all these marriages going on, a lot of bad PRs following him around. And this is what ultimately leads to his downfall is in Illinois, the Mormons have settled now in a town called Nauvoo, Nauvoo. And while they're in Nauvoo, a couple of Mormon church members get very disillusioned by Joseph Smith. And they're like, okay, this guy's way too high on his horse. He thinks he can get away with whatever he wants to get away with. And he very clearly is now practicing polygamy as a part of this so-called church, right? And so these former church members in Nauvoo begin a local newspaper, essentially as an expose, the Nauvoo Expositor. And they print one edition of the Nauvoo Expositor that essentially blows the whistle on Joseph Smith's polygamy. So you can think back to who were the two journalists that blew the whistle on Watergate? Woodward and Bernstein, correct, 1972. Okay, so this is the Woodward and Bernstein moment for Joseph Smith, that these former church members who grew very disillusioned by Joseph Smith doing whatever he wanted to do, they create the Nauvoo Expositor, and they publish one edition, blowing the whistle on his polygamy. Well, Joseph Smith doesn't like that, obviously. Yeah. So he rallies some rabble-rousers, and they go, and they essentially ransack this printing press. They bust in there, they destroy it, they burn the stuff outside of the building, and they say, to heck with these guys. How dare they assault the prophet of the Lord? Well, because Joseph Smith essentially vandalized this location, he's arrested, and he's put in jail. He and his brother Hiram, and I think they had one other church member with them, just for, what you and I would be charged with for going and crashing through the windows of Kroger and Forest, right? You're going to get in trouble for that, to some extent. So while Joseph Smith was imprisoned in the Carthage jail here in Illinois, essentially an angry anti-Mormon mob realizes this is their opportunity, that, he's in jail, Joseph Smith, he's a ne'er-do-well, we don't want these Mormons around us. They storm the jail, they kill Joseph Smith, and they kill his brother, and that's the end of Joseph Smith. So Joseph Smith essentially dies a martyr, brought on in some sense by the controversy surrounding his polygamous practices. And so kind of like his polygamy was his downfall. Whether or not you want to think that was just spiritual, non-sexual unions, whether you think this dude was just in it because he wanted it, right? It doesn't really end up looking any better for him that was sort of the way that he died. And so that is really that's really how sort of the Mormon church was galvanized, because those that were loyal to him obviously saw this as, oh my gosh, this is the death of our prophet. How dare they, right? And so that's when a man by the name of Brigham Young then rallies the forces and says, well, I'm the new leader, I'm the new prophet, and we're going to Utah, right? So Joseph Smith never makes it to Utah, but Brigham Young is the one who says, we're out of here. So that's essentially Joseph Smith's ending and his undoing. And it's interesting, some historians speculate that if Joseph Smith had actually not been killed, Mormonism might have just fizzled, because he was kind of become this kooky, eccentric prophet who people were starting to lose a lot of faith in. And had he not been killed, people might have just ended up seeing okay, this dude's kind of off of his rocker, and Mormonism just is a footnote in our history book. Because he's killed and dies as a martyr, quote unquote, now his church has this newfound backbone, right? And then they set off to Utah with Brigham Young, and that's why Mormonism is in Utah, right? That's sort of how you get there.
So what is going to be the main argument for the average Mormon when they talk to a Christian about doctrine? There's got to be some go-to thing that they use, because obviously there's some things here that we're going to go, okay, you need to answer this, you need to answer that, how come this, how come that? What is it for Mormons to us? What's the big question they're going to have for us?
Yeah, I think ultimately you should, if you're ever in conversation with a Mormon, always come back to Jesus and always come back to the gospel. Because the one thing that we can agree upon with a Mormon is the centrality of Jesus. Now, obviously, like we've said, it's Jesus plus Joseph Smith, right? They're always going to be looking at Jesus through the lens of Joseph Smith, but to at least find some sort of common ground, you can say, well, look, this is what Jesus said, right? So I've spent a lot of time talking to my Mormon friends about this whole idea of these three kingdoms of heaven. So the Book of Mormon has a very clear dichotomy of heaven and hell. Well, we agree with that. Yeah. We agree. That's what Jesus taught, right? So over and over again, I've gone back to my Mormon friends and been like, look, this is just something that cannot be reconciled. Jesus very clearly said, there's sheep and there's goats. Yeah. There's wheat and there's tares. There's the rich man and there's Lazarus. When you die, you are only going to one of two places, either to heaven with the Lord, or away from his presence into outer darkness prepared for the devil and his angels, right? There are only two destinations for the dead, and no matter how you want to try to weasel that into what D&C 76 says about the three kingdoms, you just can't get there unless you say, well, it's just Joseph Smith is the prophet and we take his word now, right? Then you've just set Joseph Smith against Jesus. Okay, well, maybe they believe that Jesus revealed this to Joseph Smith and that this is the new way things are going. That still doesn't make the problem go away, right? So the more that you can come back to what Jesus has said and that being authoritative, the more that I think you really can put a Mormon in a tricky situation and say, look, you got to either choose between Joseph Smith or Jesus here, because they don't completely agree. They might line up in a couple places, but when
you have in 2 Nephi 25:23, we know that it is by grace that we are saved after all we can do.
It is by grace that we have been saved after all we can do. Well, what do we know from Ephesians chapter 2? By grace we've been saved through faith. It is not of works, right? Because we were dead in our trespasses and sins. So we have to come back to the gospel and to Christ and to say, if you're trying to find some other way to earn a higher status of heaven, that's not going to square with what Jesus says or the apostles. And I think that's also an important point too, is when we talk to Mormons, they prize the idea of apostles because they believe that there are apostles today. They have their apostles in Salt Lake City, Utah. Now, we don't believe that, but I think we can at least say, well, if you like apostles and I like apostles, it doesn't get any bigger than the 12 apostles of Christ. Well, where do we have their teachings? We have their teachings in the New Testament. So if we're doing this the right way, we're taking Jesus' word for it in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and we should be listening to Peter and James and Paul in the New Testament epistles and take them as the first best explanation of what Christianity is, and then you can go and read all the Joseph Smith you want. Go read all of his letters, go read the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, Oh Great Price. Like, we don't have to be afraid of that as Christians, and that was been one of the reasons that I read the Book of Mormon, is like, I don't want to be afraid of this. I mean, there's nothing to be afraid of, because if I believe that the Bible is true and that the Bible will hold up under scrutiny and that the gospel is true, then I don't need to be afraid of the Book of Mormon or the Quran, and I can read it and then come to my own conclusions based on what I find as that compared to the Bible. Yeah. So we don't have to be afraid of doing the deep dives on this, but we can at least come back with confidence to say, look, whatever high ground the Mormons want to claim by having Joseph Smith in this restored church, we can say, okay, I'll grant you that you have this new system of religious belief. Does that line up with what Jesus says and the rest of the New Testament says? Because what is the New Testament but the teachings of the apostles? Yeah. Like, we have that crystallized, canonized. They would say, well, it's been corrupted. And I would say, then show me where it's been corrupted, right? Like, we're going to have to come back to this idea that the Bible is authoritative, it is inerrant, and it hasn't been corrupted. And I think if you can land there, then you have really solid ground and a solid filter to then read the Book of Mormon and see all of this stuff sometimes line up and fall short.
Okay, so I feel like we have a lot of good ammunition against the Mormon faith here. It seems to have some leaky foundations. There's some holes. We've talked about all the different places where it doesn't work. With these youth that you're talking to, obviously they have to have some ammunition against us, that they think we have some leaks and some holes in our doctrine and theologies. What are some things that you've noticed they've pointed out against us, and what are they going to try to use against us?
At first, they're going to want you to see that we're actually more similar than we think we are. And we believe Jesus. You believe Jesus. We believe he's a savior. You believe he's a savior. So they're going to come to your doorstep and try to find common ground and give you the Book of Mormon. And even written on the Book of Mormon, it says another testament of Jesus Christ.
Okay, so they're not disproving the other testaments, right? They're just trying to add on to it.
Well, that's where if you begin to ask questions, they're going to say, well, they believe in what's called the Great Apostasy. So the great apostasy is, after the time of the apostles, the church was hopelessly corrupt. We lost the gospel, we lost the reliability of the scriptures, and Joseph Smith restored it. So they're going to talk a lot about restoration. They're also going to talk about what's known as the priesthood or priesthood authority. And that is this idea that in order for you to have a church, you have to have this priesthood authority that has been bestowed upon the leadership. So it's sort of like when we ordain a pastor and we lay hands on him and we set him aside for ministry, right? Like, they think that the entire church can't exist unless that has always existed and never been corrupted, right? And so they believe that shortly after Joseph Smith received these golden plates, Peter, James, and John appeared to Joseph Smith and bestowed the priesthood on Joseph Smith. So now, all of a sudden, we've connected the dots from Peter, James, and John to Joseph Smith, that there's this priesthood authority. And so they're really going to hammer on, you don't have the priesthood authority. You and I, in our Forest Baptist Church, there's nobody here that has the priesthood authority, quote unquote, that only comes through the LDS Church. Well, we would say, what are we called in the New Testament? We are called the priesthood of God. Any Christian is called a priest according to Peter and according to Revelation. Like, we as Christians, if you are in Christ, you are a priest. So there doesn't have to be this mystical ceremony where this is bestowed upon you by the laying on of hands, because we find that if you're in Christ and you're a Christian, you and I are priests. And we are the ones now that are mediators bringing the gospel between God and, other humans, right? So again, we would disagree on their use of priesthood, where they see it as this official office that can only come through the Mormon church. We say it comes by faith in Christ that we are made to be a kingdom of priests, right? So if you're talking to a Mormon at your doorstep, it's probably going to go in those directions where, oh, you're a Christian. Oh, okay. Well, we're Christian too. But the church has been corrupt. Like, haven't you ever wondered why there's so many denominations? Oh yeah, that is true. Why are there so many denominations? How can you know which one is true? I don't know. Which one is true? Here's how you know which one is true. We have the Book of Mormon for you, right? It was Joseph Smith who finally sorted out all of the hysteria that was going on in the 1800s when people couldn't figure out were the Methodists right, the Presbyterians right, the Puritans and Baptists right. Joseph Smith says, no, I'm right. And God the Father and God the Son appeared to me and said, you are the one bringing the church back. So, you kind of come full circle then on this whole conversation to say it really all hinges on the beginnings of this, and you have to deal with who Joseph Smith is. You have to deal with what the Book of Mormon is and who Joseph Smith is. And I think the more you kind of dive into both of those, the less you're going to be satisfied as a Christian, and the more you're going to be suspect of a lot of things. I think they sort of, not maliciously, but they sort of capitalize on people's ignorance. So if people don't really know why there's Methodists and Presbyterians and Baptists, they might be more inclined to be like, I guess you're right. It would be kind of nice if there was just one true church and I could know what that church was, because people don't really know these histories of these denominations unless you sort of go to seminary or you've been in the church for a while. So someone who's going to likely become a Mormon is probably someone that is spiritual, doesn't quite have a firm grasp of Christian theology or denominationalism or, a grounding in scripture. But, I think that church people are nice, and these young men that are well-dressed come to my door and they invite me to go to church with them, and this is nice. These people are so nice, and it looks nice, and we sing nice songs, and we think nice thoughts, right? Like that's, Mormonism presents it very well, and maybe we could learn and take a few cues from them of how kind they are and how intentional they are to go seek out their neighbors, right? So that's what's going to probably draw somebody into the Mormon church. Somebody that is very well-versed in Christian doctrine, Christian theology, that, hopefully hears good preaching at their church is probably not going to be persuaded, which is certainly, I think, hopefully where I am and where hopefully many people are at Forest, where we know Mormonism doesn't really pass the smell test on the surface.
Yeah.
And the more that we go down, the less that we're satisfied, right?
Yeah.
But somebody that doesn't necessarily maybe have that background could be more, persuaded.
Boy, that is a real shaky foundation. Well, Reed, I thank you so much for talking Mormonism with us and being willing to talk to these teenagers. And this is a lot of good information, and we're really thankful you were able to dive so deep and give us so much good information on the Mormon faith and where they come from. And I feel more equipped to talk to the Mormons and people that I interact with who would be a part of the Church of Latter-day Saints. So I appreciate that.
Can I give a couple of recommendations here?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Go for it.
Get yourself a Book of Mormon. Go try to find a triple combo, which is Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, and Pearl of Great Price, because that is their full scriptures. So go and try to find one of those. And then just Google differences between 1830, Book of Mormon, and now, and find there's lists everywhere to show you how the Book of Mormon's been changed, because that's a valid concern, right? I've been very grateful to a guy by the name of Brent Metcalf. Brent Metcalf is a former Mormon who essentially wrote a scholarly examination of the Book of Mormon and was excommunicated after he published it, because
That's never a good sign.
he came to some conclusions that were not very friendly, essentially saying, I don't think the Book of Mormon is true history. I have geographical reasons to think that. I have literary reasons to think that. He publishes this book in 1993, and he's excommunicated by the Mormon Church. So Brent Metcalf has done a lot of amazing podcasts and interviews. I'd highly recommend any of those to anybody listening. Robert Rittner is the premier Egyptian scholar on the face of the earth. I think sadly he passed away a couple of years ago from kidney failure. But Robert Rittner knows everything you could ever want to know about Egypt and Egyptology, which is important for the Egyptian way that Joseph Smith kind of tries to reach into Egypt and validate what he's saying. Robert Rittner has written incredible scholarly works and done some great podcast interviews where he's essentially said, this is all bunk. Joseph Smith was just blowing smoke and hoping nobody called him on this Reformed Egyptian stuff, right? So Robert Rittner has some great stuff out there. And then Cultish, the podcast that I talked about.
Very, very good.
Cultish, just get on there. They've got like 10, 12 episodes on Mormonism. Just devour that stuff. That's essentially everything that I've spouted off today has come from those guys.
Yeah.
And I'm very indebted to them, and I'll continue to do some more deep diving.
So as believers, are you a proponent that we should be reading other religions' texts like the Book of Mormon, the Quran, Jehovah's Witness? Should we be reading those things? Do you think that's smart for us?
I think that it certainly helps your credibility with any Mormon, any Muslim that you'll meet. If you can say, I read your scriptures, you're automatically going to have their ear, right? Like if we just resort to ad hominems and say Joseph Smith was just a polygamist kook nut job from New York, okay, your chances of having a follow-up conversation are going to be very slim, right?
Yeah.
So I've sort of played the long game with these Mormon friends of mine, and hopefully to some effect, where I was able to say, I gave all 531 pages a fair shake here, and I read it cover to cover.
I mean, I've literally sat here over the weeks and watched you cross-reference, go to different verses. You've got tabs and everything. I mean, you know what you're talking about. There's no doubt.
And I think that just buys you a lot of credibility with a Mormon friend or Mormon neighbor. Now, I'm talking to these Mormon missionaries that are here for 6 weeks and then they transfer. But if you are living next door to a Mormon, I mean, that's amazing. If you can say, hey, I've read the Book of Mormon. Can I ask you some stuff about it? Like, what do you think about the fact that it talks about heaven and hell, but Joseph Smith didn't believe in that later on? You know, what do you think about that, right? That means something. And so I think we have nothing to lose by biting off the Book of Mormon and by biting off other religious texts, especially if you find yourself in conversation with those people, because you're only going to earn their respect and you're only going to earn their ear that, well, that's interesting. This Christian doesn't seem to be resorting to any of the YouTube bludgeon hammers that people resort to make fun of my Mormon underwear, right? Don't talk about the underwear, okay? That's not going to go anywhere, right? Be an intellectually honest Christian. Do your homework, and then come with some good questions. And I think that that's going to lead to good conversations. And as one of my favorite apologists, Greg Kokel, says, we should put stones in people's shoes. Like, ask questions that don't quite sit right with them and that cause them to think about something that they never thought about before. Because that is what's going to slowly, hopefully, turn over in their head and think, wow, maybe I'm wrong about this, or this doesn't add up to me. That's something, right? And I think the more that you can have those conversations and ask those good questions, I could talk to these Mormons for a year with stuff that I've come up with, right? And so just fill up that intellectual tank and then look for ways by the Holy Spirit's prompting to sprinkle that in conversations.
Well, you heard him, church family. Do your homework and go fight the good fight. Reed, thanks for being here, bud.
Thanks, brother.
This concludes our Ministering to the Mormon series. We want to thank Reed Hernandez for his insight and wisdom. Make sure to follow our Forest Baptist Church YouTube channel and podcast page or our website at forestbaptistchurch.org. You can also drop us a like on the Facebook page as well. On our next FBC Extra episode, get ready to pepper the pastor. We will see you then.